Okay, hello everyone. Welcome. It's 11 a.m. sharp. 1 second. Okay, good. Thank you. Just sorting out some minor technical issues. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where in the world you're connecting from. Welcome to this briefing on the water and climate mitigation interdependencies during the Bonn Climate Change Conference here, where we are located at the moment, sitting with several colleagues here in the room. The briefing is organized by the UN Water Expert Group on Water and Climate Change. It's co-sponsored by the governments of Egypt, Japan, UAE, and the United Kingdom, who is also hosting us here today. My name is Nicolas Franke. I am a coordinator and program officer at the World Meteorological Organization, and I will be moderating this session today. Please note that we are recording this meeting, especially the beginning part, but the Q&A we're happy to take out of the recording so that you feel free to ask any questions to us without any hesitance. I would like to now start the meeting with the opening segment, and I would like to give the floor to our Deputy Secretary General, Elena Manikova, to give some opening remarks. Elena, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nicholas. Greetings to everyone from Geneva, and thank you for your interest, and thank you for connecting. I had the privilege to also participate in the workshop yesterday, and I know that what you're going to hear is very, very important. From the WMO side, and I'm very privileged to be first to open this briefing. From the WMO side, we're extremely proud and pleased that Sharm el-Sheikh implementation plan at last COP26 explicitly recognized water for adaptation. We have been working for years tirelessly to understand the water availability. WMO has published its first global water resources report when we were preparing to Sharm el-Sheikh COP. And in this global water resource report, we have seen a number of significant hotspots where the water availability is lower than it should be. So we have been always concerned with the frequency, growing frequency of the droughts and floods, which put at risk lives of our people. We have been also concerned with availability of freshwater resources and also for the food security and energy security, highly dependent on water. So these components have been clearly understood by parties, and therefore in the Sharm el-Sheikh implementation plan, the water now sits in the adaptation section, and it's first time that conference of parties put it in the decision. However, the work has not finished yet, because we clearly realize that the water is also needed in adaptation area. Not just needed, the whole Paris Agreement, actually, implementation success depends on availability of water resources, from our view. In mitigation sector, besides hydropower, which many countries are using for decades, the water is also needed for the energy sector as a cooling for nuclear powers, for instance. It's needed to produce hydrogen. It's needed to grow plants to create biofuels. It also needed for the healthy wetlands and badlands and forests, which provide which are natural sinks for the CO2. So there is a lot we see is needed in terms of water for mitigation. However, this part was not clearly understood yet. So we are very happy that the UN Water organized this special group, and we are happy to be co-convener of this special group together with UNESCO and UNECE, United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, to help you, member states and delegations, to see where the water should be recognized in the different streams of the climate action. We know that in most of the countries, national determined contributions, water is flagged as important factor, but mainly for adaptation. So the purpose of this briefing is to tell you how more we know or should know in terms of water needs for mitigation, and hopefully to see this whole water cycle as one element of the Paris Agreement. In addition to that, those of you who followed the UN Water Conference recently in New York would also know that WMO is advocating for the global water information system, because without this information, we would not be able to give you further comprehensive information on the availability of water resources. And we hope that we would be able to create such a system and provide increasingly accurate information for your needs and for your actions in the near future. Thank you very much, and look forward to hear the results of the workshop as a part of this briefing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elena. Really appreciate it. I would now like to give the floor to our colleague from UNESCO, Anil Mishra, Chief of Section of the Hydrological Systems and Water Scarcity Section. Anil, the floor is yours.
Hello, Nicola, thank you very much. I'm very pleased to welcome you on behalf of UN Water Expert Group, Water and Climate Change, which is co-coordinated by UNESCO, WMO, and United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, UNECE, to this briefing session based on the outcome of our discussion yesterday we had on the water and climate mitigation interdependencies hosted by GIZ. I would also like to thank from the UN Water Expert Group to co-sponsor countries, Egypt, Japan, United Arab Emirates, and United Kingdom. The United Nations UN Water Expert Group, Water and Climate Change, is devoted to coordinate its effort through UN agencies to bring the issues to highlight climate change impact. We did in the past climate policy brief, which also highlighted the importance of mitigation along the side of adaptation. And this particular workshop outcome, which will be presented by our colleague now, water and climate mitigation and interdependencies, will feed into the upcoming framework program both for UNFCCC and IPCC. We hope both UN agencies also attended and provided their contribution to this workshop. I'm sure this briefing session will help member states to really take the issues at the highest level so that water's role in mitigation can be highlighted, but also in the upcoming process of 7th cycle of IPCC and UNFCCC work program. And with that, I would like to thank United Kingdom's delegation for giving us opportunity to present this briefing. And thank you very much. Over to you, Nicola.
Thank you very much, Anil. Yes, and without further ado, I'll give the floor to our host here today and co-sponsor, Andy Robbie, Senior Water Security Advisor at the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office in the United Kingdom. Andy, the floor is yours.
Just a huge welcome to the meeting room here, which is rather strategically placed next to the River Rhine. I must say, it's one of the most marvellous UK offices I've ever been in my life. And I've been in this business for 40 years.
Just a couple of comments as your host and co-sponsor with
Egypt, Japan, and UAE. For some years now, we've been saying that if climate change were a shark, then the shark's teeth is water, and that it will bite the poorest, the hardest. And for several years now, we've been saying that the water sector contributes some 10% of greenhouse gas emissions. So water is part of the problem. Now it's becoming clearer that our ambition to keep 1.5 alive will not be possible with current projections of water availability for all forms of mitigation. So water is now regarded as critical to mitigation too. So many thanks to WMO, UNESCO, and many, many others for this initiative. The experts I heard yesterday have got some really rich data to make the evidence for this clearer, and I look forward to hearing more. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Andy, and thank you also for the continued leadership of the UK since at least COP 26, but you already since, as you mentioned, over 40 years now. I would like to now take you virtually from Bonn to Japan to Tokyo and give the floor to Tokioka Toshikatsu, the Director for International Coordination of River Engineering at the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport and Tourism of Japan. Tokioka-san, the floor is yours.
So thank you very much, Nicholas and colleagues. And also thank you very much for inviting Japan, MRIT, for yesterday's wonderful workshop of the discussing to the interlinkage between water and climate change mitigation. So, and my boss, Mr. Kusano, Vice Minister, gave our remarks, and I was also attending to the workshop, and I personally impressed very much that so many stakeholders and so many international organization and private company or NGOs attending yesterday's workshop, and I feel that this shows that this theme of the interlinkage between water and climate change mitigation is recognized as such an important issue in the international communities. So this is a clear proof that yesterday's so many participants to the workshop. And in Japan, we are the government agency, so we are critically responsible for the implementation, and we are responsible for the implementing the actual practice in the field. So now our ministry have to take yesterday's wonderful discussion to take this outcome to our political action, into our political action, take this concept into our government implementation in the field. So this is our responsibility. So that's why I am very much looking forward to hearing the great outcome of yesterday's workshop. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing the outcome and looking forward to taking this outcome to our policy and implementation in Japan. Thank you very much for Nicholas.
Thank you very much, Tokioka-san, and thanks again to the support of the Japanese government. Now I'll bring you back virtually here to Bonn, Germany, where Dr. Walid Hakiki, the head of sector of the Ministry of Water Resources and Irrigation of Egypt, is here with us today. So Dr. Walid Hakiki, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. Thank you very much. It was a very useful and very, meeting yesterday. As Egypt was actually hosting the COP27 and co-chairing the Interactive Dialogue 3 during the UN 2023, let me just give you a very quick overview and brief on what happened. Yeah, actually, after many years of futile attempts by the water community to water the COP, as we always say it in Egypt, so Egyptian presidency of COP27 has seized that opportunity to bring water to the heart of climate action through actually 4 major actions. The first was the introduction of the Action on Water Adaptation and Resilience Initiative, AWARE, in partnership with WMO. The second was the COP presidency organized a high-level roundtable on water security, and this was followed by the first thematic day on water during COP. In addition, a water pavilion was hosted in partnership with international partner countries and organizations. And these 4 major actions have culminated by introducing water and its links with climate change for the first time ever in the COP27 covering decision, the SHIP, the Sharm el-Sheikh Implementation Plan. Also, COP27 achieved a breakthrough agreement to provide loss and damage funding to the most vulnerable countries impacted by the effect of climate change, creating a specific fund for loss and damage market, an important point of progress. And that also was also the UN 2023 Water Conference represented a critical juncture to promote the linkages between the water and climate agendas through linking COP27 outcomes with the UN 2023 Water Conference. And this actually interactive dialogue addressed many water-related climate change that we face. And we were really glad to share that dialogue together with Japan. And I think with that, I will come to conclude my opening remarks. And thank you very much for the hosting, for the hosting countries, and for Nicholas. Thank you very much. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Walid, and yeah, I look forward to continuing this close collaboration with Egypt and with you personally, of course. Now, after this opening segment of the briefing, we would like to present to you the outcomes of the technical workshop that happened here yesterday in Bonn on the water and climate change mitigation interdependencies. And therefore, I would like to give the floor to my colleague, if I may say so, Tony Sletyer, Water Policy and Strategy Advisor for WMO, supported by the government of Australia. So, Tony, without further ado, we look forward to hearing from you the outcomes of yesterday's workshop. Thank you.
Okay, good day, everyone. And
Nicholas, Tony is muted. Unmute him.
Yeah. Speaking. Okay. Apologies, everyone. I won't repeat what I said before. I will just get straight into the briefing. Good to be here with you. Now let's have the screen share. Screen share's working. Yep. Okay. So yesterday there was a major workshop, and first time there has been a workshop on this particular subject in our living memory, which is on the relationship, as you've heard, between water availability and the delivery of climate mitigation objectives. There were over 50 people in the workshop, and from all the major organisations that could be mobilised to contribute here, from the water sector, the energy sector, and the environment sector in particular. And these are global organisations, and so we had lots of engagement and contribution. The reason that the expert group decided it was time for this is that in the last census report of the final IPCC sixth cycle assessments, it was identified that there would be trade-offs required with some key mitigation measures. And that shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, and it was not prominent in the IPCC findings, but nevertheless it was there, and it was a flag that there was an issue here that we all had to think about, and governments needed to think about. But it was as I said, not prominent in the report, and it was managed in language of the type. There's a quote here giving an example of the type of treatment these issues have had in the IPCC. it's seen as, there are potential risks and consequences of not addressing the water issues up front when mitigation issues are being considered. And this narrative is found in many parts of the IPCC's work. But what it didn't do was to drill down into more specifically into just what that meant in terms of the actual mitigation agendas and the actual water demands of those projects. And that is why we thought it was time to talk about that, having been prompted by those findings. The recent or emerging conclusion that we're certainly hearing loud and clear here at Bonn that accelerated action is required, and that governments have to do more and more on the mitigation front to achieve the 1.5 degree objective. It's also, of course, a major stimulus to us having this workshop, because our intent here is to show how water can be seen and should be treated as part of the solution to the climate challenge. Whilst at the same time, we all know, and it's well understood, that climate is deeply impacting water resources in many ways, and therefore there's a virtuous cycle here if we can get it all right and can manage the water well enough that the water in turn can do its job for us on the mitigation front. So the particular objectives we set ourselves were to basically find what we could about these issues, to assist member states in 3 ways. To assist member states at home as you work on your nationally determined contributions and would need to be thinking about water issues as you prepare your mitigation strategies for the NDCs. To help member states figure out what types of actions will be useful through the UNFCCC processes of the COP and the subsidiary bodies of the type that are meeting here in Bonn. And thirdly, to assist member states to work out what kind of knowledge and information they would like to get from the IPCC process in the next cycle. So those were the particular, if you like, things we're trying to assist. Now, there were, for the purposes of the workshop, we divided the mitigation world into 3 parts. And this is partly driven by the way the IPCC itself divides issues under the 6th cycle with a report on mitigation, which is largely focused on energy sector issues, a report on the land systems, which was largely focused on the sequestration potential of those systems, and then a range of other issues, mitigation issues, which aren't easy to describe in a single phrase. The mitigation potential of the mitigation role of the energy sector is, of course, quite fundamental, and is the thing that we most usually think about in the mitigation space in terms of the clean energy transition that most countries are already embarked on. And this IPCC table shows this table, which doesn't, I think, belong in the footnotes to the IPCC, but is published by them, shows the types of water dependencies and the scale of those water dependencies that exist across the energy system world. You'll see here there are very large error bars. There are very a lot of uncertainty about the scale of that dependency. Nevertheless, water features in everything, and in case you're wondering, why water would feature in, say, a sector like geothermal. It's all around the way that the heat needs to be released from the earth, and also the cooling requirements of the thermal plants that process that energy when it comes from the So these are not always obvious relationships, but nevertheless they are there. And when you drill down far enough, they're very particular and real. And to supply water for these purposes requires sourcing water somehow. And if you're in a water scarce or water unpredictable environment, which increasingly due to climate change we all are, then that becomes a particular challenge, particular policy challenge for governments. So in summary, on the energy sector, we identified yesterday that water was quite central in as feedstock for biofuels, and in fact the whole bioenergy domain is dependent on water to grow the crops and other feedstock for those energy systems. And there is similarly for hydrogen. Of course, water is both consumed in the chemistry of the production of hydrogen. It's made from water, which is broken apart to make hydrogen, and is also required in the processing and in the management and the extraction of energy from those systems. And water, of course, obviously is required for hydropower, and that has a consequence. Even though the water is just flowing through a hydropower turbine, it has a consequence for downstream flow patterns and for the evaporation of water from storages. That does mean that there is a water policy relationship, and which is necessary to work out with the planned expansion of the hydropower sector in order to achieve our climate targets. At the workshop yesterday, lots of data was presented about the growth potential of these sectors, and the final report of the workshop will endeavour to attach numbers, the numbers that exist that can show the actual water demand at the global level of the intended expansion of these industries at the global level, so that we can get a sense of the scale and materiality of that relationship. Another issue which we discussed was the likely expansion of pumped hydro facilities. These are hydro facilities that operate in a closed loop, where when energy is cheap or the sun is shining, you pump the water up the hill, and when energy is expensive or the sun's not shining, you use that, you allow it to flow back down the hill to drive a turbine and make energy. So this is, if you like, a great big water-based battery that isn't an essential part isn't a technically essential part of any system, but is most likely we heard yesterday, the most economic solution to managing these intermittent supplies of energy, say from solar and wind power in particular. So that was an important discussion, because we don't often think of pumped hydro as obviously it uses water, but it's all in one closed loop system. So you think, well, how does that matter? Well, it matters to the extent that that water is then reserved for that purpose, and it also evaporates from the storages, and there is a cost, a water cost and consequence, and it has an impact on the flows ultimately. Then we discussed the get back here. We discussed the battery technologies, which are so essential for just about everything nowadays, and the dependence of those on rare earth mining and the high water demands of the mining sector. and that was an important part of the discussion. Moving on, we then looked at the sequestration role. Now this is another table that was published in an IPCC report, which just shows the materiality of things. And you'll see that by 2050, the role of sinks is intended to far exceed the actual emissions we make. So we'll be on the road to recovery if all goes according to the net zero plan. And you'll see also the important contribution that sequestration has to driving the net zero result. Now, the workshop discussed all the ways that these sequestration measures were dependent on the availability of water. And the bottom line is all the sequestration measures that are based on natural systems require water to survive. We heard the effects of desertification and other impacts of water stress and water scarcity or water mismanagement on the capacity of many systems to provide those basic sequestration services, particularly wetland systems, peatland systems, forests, and so forth. IPCC have made a special point in their report that when you grow a lot of carbon, forest to sequester carbon, that absorbs and requires a lot of water, and that is water that is not then flowing down into for other uses. So these are issues that have to be worked through. Of course, we'll continue to be planting forests and trying to maintain and manage these natural assets. But it will be very important that the water issues are understood and thought through in doing that. And we discussed at the workshop the various issues that come up. Just make the point that in wetland systems and peatland systems, currently, all the assumptions that we saw yesterday were that it's assumed that water will not continue to be diverted out of these systems. That is, to improve their sequestration potential, you've got to actually reduce the removal of water from these systems and try to restore them as much as possible to their natural state. And yet in many countries, water continues to be taken from these systems to serve a whole lot of other social and economic purposes, which are very valid purposes, of course, but this is the disconnect that we have to work through or most countries have to work through. The importance of coastal zone systems for sequestration was also given a lot of emphasis in discussion yesterday. We then talked through the other types of ways that the improved management of water can contribute to sequestration, to emission reduction outcomes. And these are many and varied. For example, and mostly they are to do with the release of methane and nitrous oxide. So, for example, many irrigation systems are relying on having water sitting there, basically stagnating for extended periods, and that releases a lot of methane, which could be mitigation could be achieved by improving the management of those irrigation systems and how water is used in those irrigation systems, which has both a benefit for water. There's less water wastage, but also a benefit for mitigation. And many of the measures that we reviewed yesterday were of this type, where there was a strong co-benefit. Another, which is not on this list, which is on the screen now, is to do with the waste management of wastewater. We learned that wastewater itself is estimated to account for 12% of global methane emissions and up to 3% of total global greenhouse gas emissions in aggregate, and that is probably a base, that is probably an at least number, and as more is understood, that number will only go up. So just by managing the water that runs off our landscapes and out of our sanitation systems and so forth, and getting the technologies right for those will be a huge mitigation contribution in and of itself, which is presently would also have other co-benefits for health and water quality and so forth. So these are really important discoveries. When then having absorbed lots of information about from lots of experts about all these water and climate links, we then looked at what was actually happening in the NDCs at the country level. And we were informed that only 1/3 of NDCs address wastewater issues, only a half address wetlands issues. Only 16% of NDCs in their energy reforms even mentioned water as an issue. Only 13% of countries that have peatlands, despite the fundamental role of peatlands in sequestration, have mentioned peatlands in their NDCs. And there are very, very few NDCs that have any kind of targets in the water space that would drive, allow them to drive the ambition they have. So that was a bit of a wake-up call for us. We also then heard excellent information from both UNFCCC Secretariat and IPCC about the processes that are available for having water more closely incorporated into the work programs of these bodies. The UNFCCC briefed us on the current processes of the global stocktake, the scaling up ambition work program, the Coronavia work program, and so forth. And these are strangely at the moment barely considering water issues, and we wonder why that is so. And we will be, as an expert group, thinking about what we can advise countries, whether we can advise countries further on how better to engage with these water issues in these processes. And similarly with the IPCC, the 7th cycle work program is now being prepared by member states, and we will hopefully that will contain more opportunities to learn more and have more of the sorts of thorough assessment work that only the IPCC can do to learn more about the issues that we've been discovering in the workshop. We finally, just to wrap up, we learned a whole lot of things. We learned what we don't know. We learned quite a lot about what we don't know. We really wanted to be able to present you today some numbers that would say, look, you know, water is responsible for X% of mitigation and all this sort of thing, and make it very, make a headline for you that would be really attention grabbing, but it's not possible. At least it's not possible to do it in an honest way. We don't, it's just, the data just doesn't exist that link about the sort of water flow and water volume consequences of different types of mitigation action, and presenting that at a global scale. The relationships are not well enough understood and not well enough calculated and reported for us to be able to do that. There's lots of bits and pieces of information, but nothing that allows us to tell the global story we would like to be able to tell in this sort of briefing. And similarly, the trade-off issues, as the IPCC's language, using the IPCC's language, you know, if demand for, let's say, an energy sector like hydrogen means that water needs to be in a water scarce environment, means that water has to come from a food production system to support that industry. Then what is the what does all that mean in practical terms for food security and so forth? And what kind of guidance can be then available for governments trying to figure these out, the right balance of their objectives? And we don't have that kind of knowledge presently at the global level. And we don't have, and so that they were important findings about what we didn't know. So just to finalize this and to give you a sense of our overall conclusions, first of all, we want you to be, we think that it's justified from what we've learned and sharing with you that all countries need to be thinking of water as part of the solution. Think of water as part of the solution. We all are accustomed to thinking of water as part of the problem, and therefore something we really have to worry about. And we do, of course, have to worry about water, but it's also well managed and well subject to the right policies and management frameworks. Water can also, is a necessary part of the climate solution, and we need to. Each country needs to work out how to achieve that in order to achieve its commitments, its climate commitments. The second conclusion, these sorry, my screen covered up my message. It's now clear. The second message was that from the workshop was that we just can't assume away the water dependency and think that it, as many NDCs appear to be now doing, and think it's a non-issue. It is a real issue, and it is very important that water impacts are considered and worked through and thought about as choices are made about mitigation measures, particularly in areas of water scarcity. Our third of our four conclusions was that there are many opportunities to successfully co-implement both mitigation measures and measures for achieving the sustainable availability of water for all, as we're all committed to under SDGs, under the Sustainable Development Goals. And I mentioned the wastewater example, but there are many other examples, and the irrigation example. There are many other examples of how there are win-win results available in this for countries that can put the right policies and measures in place. Finally, there are real knowledge gaps, some of which I have mentioned to you, and it is very important that that we can fill those gaps so that all countries are better able to make the sorts of decisions about mitigation that we all have to make, we are therefore hoping that countries will support through the IPCC process the raising of water issues or the further analysis of water issues in the IPCC work program, and that countries will also support water issues being incorporated more directly into the current relevant UNFCCC work programs. Okay, I'm finished there, and back to you, Nicholas.
Thank you very much, Tony, for presenting the outcomes of yesterday's workshop, and also thank you very much for your continued support in working with us. So yes, so now we come to the Q&A part of this briefing. Please feel free to raise your hands if you know how to do this in Zoom, you will see on the below right corner of your screen, the reaction sign, and you should be able there to click on it and then raise your hand. But please feel also free to just unmute yourself and raise your question.
I have a question or a comment.
Good, Andy, go ahead,
It's been a fascinating this last couple of days, 24 hours, which may well change the face of the way water is treated by the climate community. I think for years, I think we've been thinking, why isn't water higher up the agenda other than an impact? And we're now seeing its dependency for mitigation goals. The point I wanted to make was, what about all this finance that we need in the water sector? Is it possible to get some of the climate finance now directed to tackling water security and strengthening water security as part of carbon pricing? Should water not be priced into carbon? How about that? It's a vision.
I asked if it was a question or a comment, but I think it was neither. Andy Roby from the UK said it was a vision. I think already if a mitigation measure passes the tests of the Green Climate Fund and other tests for qualifying for funding, then it will qualify, including its water content. So I think through that type of process, it's not a the door is open. Is my understanding, but this is not a briefing on those subjects, and we don't have anybody here with the right knowledge to respond to your vision.
And you wanted to add, please go ahead.
Well, this is not to respond to Andy's question, but of course, as Tony said, the access to Green Climate Fund and other mechanisms, particularly considering water's role, should be looked into this. But my comment is, Tony, your presentation greatly covers all those fields of discussion. The only thing that I want to also highlight, the cryosphere role, particularly from permafrost and also glaciers, which we also had an expert presenting its role on the mitigation and also on releasing CO2. I think we need to somehow include that part. There are lots of unknown, although lots of permafrost is not major, but that's one of the components that we should not overlook into our briefing. Of course, I'm sure IPCC scientific community will have a further reflection on that, and as well as it will be in the UNFCCC work program, because these are the resources that goes hand in hand for the development goals because of melting glaciers and its role on mitigation aspects. So this should not be forgotten when we will finalize the reporting.
Thank you very much, Anil, for that. I'll now give the floor to Stefan Uhlenbrook from the World Meteorological Organization.
Thank you very much, Niklas, and everyone. It's very interesting, much appreciated, this workshop. I would like to make two comments. First, try a response to Andy Roby's visionary thinking of pricing water into carbon. And if the price is a mechanism to change people's behavior, then it should be priced. I agree. So like making carbon emissions more expensive, then that should reflect in a change of social behavior. So I very much agree with that. The challenge for water is probably the following. While carbon through atmospheric circulation is globally redistributed, and the localities of the impacts of water use are very local, very specific. So using water for biofuel production in a humid tropical environment can have a completely different impact on water availability in a semi-arid environment. So therefore, the total water use needs to be very much put into that very local context. What are the other water users? What is the competition for water at the local point, at a given location? What are, how people, environment, ecosystems kind of depend on that. So that makes it so difficult to come up with a pricing mechanism for water, because of the water impacts are always very local, very specific. The second comment, if I may, I think in the nice graph that we saw yesterday, excuse me, sorry, at the workshop, as well as which was shown again by Tony Sledger today, and the kind of the different water uses per kilowatt hour or megawatt hour, doesn't matter. The huge spread, and I believe what we as water people need to become a bit more specific is in differentiating between different water uses, particularly for hydropower. Much of the water use in hydropower is non-consumptive. So water is running through a turbine, and it's not evaporating back to the atmosphere, which is a complete different thing for our bioenergy production or the use for mining of different fossil fuels. So I think we need to be more specific. And when we say water use, what is the impact of that? Is it consumptive? Is it non-consumptive? Does the change by being water stored changes environmental requirements for instance, downstream aquatic communities in the river depend on that water? Well, the water is coming, but it's maybe coming at a different season when the energy price is maybe dictating the water to come, and not when naturally the ecosystem would require the water to come. So these kind of change of hydrological dynamics are maybe not, they are conservative in terms of the total amount of water doesn't change much, but the ecosystem requirements are affected quite significantly. So therefore, different water uses, we have to look at the consumptive part as and also look at the hydrological dynamics. What does that mean for ecosystem requirements? And while I'm having the word, I hope not many arms go up, then I would like to make one more point, if I may. 2 weeks ago, we had the WMO Congress here in Geneva, excuse me, and it was decided to engage in a much better greenhouse gas monitoring system around the world. The Congress, the members of WMO made that decision. And because we understand that the carbon cycle, we don't understand very well. These general statements of the ocean is a carbon sink, which is true in most of the cases, varies a lot depending on ocean temperature, varies a lot on salinity, etc. So it's much more complex. So therefore, there's a commitment made to actually understand these processes better through better monitoring, through better observation networks. Tony very clearly illustrated today, in water, we have too many question marks as well. We also don't understand the system well enough. And we don't have the numbers to tell the beautiful, simple story as it was said in his PowerPoint presentation. But how long can we continue with this excuse? Should we not, similar to the Greenhouse Gas Commission section, to say we engage in a better monitoring and actually try to come up with the numbers in a reasonable time frame? And I think we can, at least in some regions, in some river basins, maybe not globally, not immediately, but I think we need to reinforce our efforts in monitoring and coming up with better predictions. Thank you. Over.
Thank you very much, Stefan, for the very important points raised. I don't see any other hand up at the moment, but please feel free to also provide any reflections or comments, or we still have 1 or 2 minutes left for the Q&A part. Also, colleagues in the room or online, I'll give you some time.
I'm going to use Stefan's excuse. If there's nobody else speaking, I will always jump in.
Go ahead.
But Nicholas, really, it's the next steps. Are we into that section of the discussion? What are we going to do now with this information? As our Japanese colleague said, is it down to just putting it in briefings to our politicians and ministers so that they're aware of it, or can we be more proactive than that? A challenge. Not even a vision.
we can try to, from the UN water perspective, of course, this is a beginning of the discussion. We will also inform our UN water expert group who were not able to be there that these ideas that we have gathered, of course, we will refine based on the comment. But as we highlighted, the objective is to really feed into work program of UNFCCC and IPCC. So we'll definitely have conversation with these two entities, but also with member states, how really that can be taken into the policy level, so that water role in the mitigation is not just discussed, but really in terms of also financing that you have raised, issues can be addressed. So from the co-coordinator perspective, we will brief our UN partners, UN members, and also discuss with our work program, UNFCCC and IPCC entities.
Just add a comment to that, the UN, within the UN system, we can do all we can, and much has been done to endeavour to raise awareness of these issues. Generally speaking, we find that if we promote an event about water and climate, it will attract a lot of interest from the water sector. And the water sector will get very energized and get very committed to trying to do what the water sector can do about this. But there is typically very little engagement by the, if you like, the water dependent sectors, the energy sector, the food production sector, and all the others that require water for their success. So the answer to your question, Andy, I think is that it's incumbent on those of us, and I don't know the balance of representation in this room, whether they are foreign policy officials, climate officials, energy officials, or water officials. My prediction is probably mostly water officials, but who knows? I do hope that others are participating. But it is very important inside governments that these conversations are occurring across departments and ministries, and that the message about these dependencies is being heard by the climate negotiators and the energy policy people inside governments. If that doesn't happen, then all the work in the world inside the UN organizations won't count for much, because it won't penetrate the walls inside governments. So I'll leave it at that. But this is, and I don't want to pass the buck back to the audience, but that is really where the momentum needs to occur. And the best we can do is to try to support you with information, platforms, and processes that allow you to have those conversations inside your countries.
Yeah, thanks, Tony, for very well, good points raised. And this is indeed what we are trying to do here as the UN system, together with our partners that we collaborate through UNWater. We try to coordinate our joint support to member states, to the parties, and we're happy that we have the support of the member states here at the briefing today, and also at the workshop yesterday. Today we have over 30 member states that have registered for this briefing, so there is interest in it. As Tony well reflected, it's let's see how much the interest is of the energy community and the climate change community on these water issues. But we're really here to try to help and support and basically show that water can be part of the solution to our Paris Agreement objectives. So I think with this we can come to a close of this briefing. We really hope that this briefing brought you some insights of what we know and what we not know about the water and climate mitigation interdependencies, and how it may assist you, state parties to the convention, to determine how to manage these water dependencies into your national determined contributions, and into the UNFCCC processes. We're very happy that we are engaging also very closely here with our colleagues at the UNFCCC Secretariat to support parties in that endeavor, and also to consider at the next IPCC a working program to include working areas to fill these gaps. So the UN Water Expert Group on Water and Climate Change, as mentioned, we stand ready to continue supporting you in this endeavor. Please feel free to reach out to us. We will share the presentation given today with all registered participants, and we look forward to continue a fruitful collaboration with you. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good rest of the day.